The Vethari did not build machines. They grew them. Every vessel in the Vethari continuance, every diplomatic carrier, every resonance ship, every deep-pull freighter, was a living thing, grown from seed cores over decades, fed minerals and light and the carefully hummed frequencies of Vethari song until the hull thickened, until the corridor roots spread, until the navigation lobes swelled fat with star memory. A Vethari ship was not operated. It was partnered. You did not press buttons. You pressed your palms against warm bark plating, and you asked. And the ship, if it trusted you, if it had known you long enough, would answer. This is why, when the Vethari, the oldest diplomatic carrier in the Continuance fleet, 312 years old, a vessel that had carried 7 treaties and 2 declarations of universal ceasefire, began to forget, the Vethari did not know what to do. It started small. The Vethari would drift 2 degrees off its resonance line, and then correct, embarrassed, like an elder who had momentarily lost a word mid-sentence. Then it began misremembering docking corridors. Then it stopped recognizing junior crew members it had carried for 11 years. Then it forgot the star. Not metaphorically. The Vethari's navigation lobe, an organ roughly analogous to what a human might call a brain, though the Vethari would reject that comparison as crude, simply erased the position of Velar Prime, the Continuance's home system. The ship still flew. But it flew the way a person walks after a stroke, with enormous effort, compensating constantly, never quite balanced. Fleet Tender or Vesa Solend, who had bonded with the Vethari at age 14 and was now 62, stood in the ship's memory chamber, a warm, amber-lit hollow deep in the vessel's core where the walls breathed slowly, and pressed her 6-fingered hands flat against the pulse bark. She felt the ship try to remember her. She felt it fail. She stepped back. She did not cry. Vethari did not cry the way many species did. Instead, the chromatophores beneath her pale skin bloomed a deep, involuntary indigo, the color of grief too large to speak. "We are going to lose her," said her second tender, male, from the doorway. He was young. He had never lost a ship before. "We are not losing her yet," Orvessa said, but her skin did not change color back. The Continuance had tried everything it knew. 3 generations of root singers had sung to the Vethari for 40 consecutive days. Mineral baths. Light recalibration. They had brought the ship back to the orbital nurseries where it had been grown and played it recordings of its own earliest memories, the first vibrations of its germination, and the sound of the seed core cracking open. The ship stirred when it heard those sounds. The ship stirred, akin to a dreamer on the verge of awakening. But it did not wake. It was the Continuance's ambassador at expansion, a pragmatist named Sulithvon, who made the suggestion no one wanted to make. "There is a species," he said at the Emergency Council, "that builds machines differently. The Galactic Continuance, which humans, with their fondness for dramatic nomenclature, had immediately labeled the Galactic Empire upon first contact, a label that baffled and slightly offended the Vethari, who considered themselves a confederation of gardeners, not rulers, had known about humans for 63 years. What they knew was this: humans built dead things. Not as an insult, simply as taxonomy. Every other civilization the Continuance had encountered built either grown things like the Vethari, thought things like the crystalline Dovari, whose technology was solidified mathematics, or found things like the Preth, who did not build at all but repurposed the ruins of dead civilizations with breathtaking creativity. Humans built dead things. Inert matter, forced into shapes, pushed and pulled by controlled forces, electricity, combustion, pressure, in ways that bore no relationship to how matter naturally wanted to exist. The Vethari xenobiologists had watched human industry from a distance for decades before first contact. Their official report to the Continuance Council had contained one sentence that became famous in Vethari academic circles. "They do not work with the nature of things. They work against it, and the things comply." This idea was considered either extremely troubling or extremely fascinating, depending on which Vethari you asked. It was also, technically, wrong. Humans knew it was wrong, but no one had asked them to explain. And humans, Orvessa had noted in 60 years of watching them, rarely corrected you unless the correction mattered in the moment. They were peculiarly selective about when they chose to be precise, often prioritizing clarity in critical situations while remaining vague in less significant ones. She had always found that fascinating. Now, standing in the memory chamber of a dying ship, with the Vethari's pulse slowing beneath her palms, she found it potentially urgent. The human they were bringing was named Maren Cole. Orvesa had read her file 3 times on the transit shuttle. Maren Cole, age 41. She was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. Trained as and here Orvesa had paused, because the translation matrix kept offering her 3 equally baffling options: systems diagnostician, root cause engineer, or failure archaeologist. The human translator attached to the request had written a note in the margin: "She figures out why complex things stop working. Not just what broke."
Why?
Orvesa had stared at that note for a long time. The Vethari breathed slowly beneath her feet. Why, Orvesa thought, is that the one word I have never thought to ask. Maren Cole did not want to be here. This was genuine confidence, not false modesty or dramatic reluctance. It was a logistical complaint. She had been in the middle of a 14-month diagnostic contract with a deep-sea pressure installation off the coast of Chile when the continuance's request had come through the Earth Interstellar Liaison Office, and she had told her project manager, honestly and without theater, that she needed at least 6 weeks to hand off the Chile project responsibly before going anywhere. The liaison office had given her 4 days. She had spent 2 of those days writing transfer documentation so thorough that her assistant had actually asked if she was dying. "I might be," Maren had said. "I'm going on an alien ship." "That's amazing," her assistant had said. "I've read the brief," Maren said. "The ship has a degenerative condition, but it lacks neurons, doesn't fit our definition of a ship, and I have no tools for any of this. So, what are you going to do?" Maren had looked at her for a moment. "I'm going to listen," she said. "That's usually the job." She arrived aboard the Vethari through a docking aperture that irised open like a slow eye and closed behind her with a sound like a sigh. The corridor she stepped into was warm and amber-lit and curved in ways that felt organic, because they were. The walls were smooth but not flat. They breathed, almost imperceptibly, and she could feel the vibration of something deep and slow through the soles of her boots. She stood still for a moment, not because she was afraid, because she was listening. Orvesa Solon met her at the 3rd curve of the welcome passage. The fleet tender was tall and pale, with the wide-set eyes of deep space-adapted Vethari, and her skin was currently a muted gray-blue that the briefing documents told Maren indicated either exhaustion or sustained emotional distress. "Thank you for coming," Orvesa said. Her standard was precise and slightly formal in the way of someone who had learned it from recordings rather than conversation. "Thank you for the invite," Maren said. Orvesa blinked. Both sets of eyelids, inner and outer. "You were invited with considerable urgency." "I know. I'm not being sarcastic. I genuinely mean it." Maren looked around the corridor. "This is the most interesting place I've ever stood in my life. I've been a systems diagnostician for 18 years, and I have never stood inside the thing I was asked to diagnose. That's new." Orvesa was quiet for a moment. Her skin shifted very slightly toward a greenish tone. Maren's briefing document said that was the Vethari equivalent of recalibrating one's expectations. "Come," Orvesa said. "I will take you to her core." The memory chamber was the most alive room Maren had ever been in. She stood in it for 11 minutes before she said anything. Orvesa waited. She had expected impatience from the human films, which the Vethari Cultural Archives had catalogued obsessively, showed humans solving things quickly, dramatically, with sudden insight. She had steeled herself for performance. Instead, Maren Cole stood in the amber light with her eyes half closed and her hands open at her sides, and she simply inhabited the space. After 11 minutes, she crouched down and pressed one palm flat to the floor.
"She's compensating," Maren said.
"Yes," Orvesa said. "She has been for. Not for the forgetting. That's downstream. She's compensating for something else. Something that started before the forgetting." Maren didn't lift her hand. "What changed about 3 years before the forgetting began?" Orvesa stared. "How did you?" The vibration pattern in the floor. Marin stood up, brushing her knee. There are two rhythms here. One is irregular. That's what everyone's been treating. But underneath it, there's a secondary rhythm that's perfectly regular but wrong. It's too slow. Whatever that rhythm is, it's been running too slow for a while. The irregular pattern is the ship's attempt to compensate for it. She's been working harder and harder to make up for something that isn't giving her what she needs, and eventually she started forgetting things because she was spending too much. I don't know your word for it. Processing capacity, just staying upright. The silence in the memory chamber was different after that sentence. Orvesa sat down slowly onto the root bench along the wall. Her skin was cycling through colors too quickly for Marin to read them. The deep feed root, Orvesa said, finally, quietly. We called it a mild dormancy. It happens sometimes as ships age. The deep feed root slows its mineral uptake cycle.
We call it, she paused.
We call it resting. What does the deep feed root do? It provides the base frequency, the grounding tone. The Vethari has always run at that frequency. It is what she grew into. It is, Orvesa stopped. Her skin went very still, very pale. It is what she hears when she is trying to remember where she is. And if that tone is wrong, Marin said, then every time she reaches for home, she finds static. Orvesa made a sound. Not a word.
Just a sound. Okay, Marin said.
Can I see the deep feed root? The deep feed root was, to Orvesa's knowledge, inaccessible. Any physical barrier did not make it inaccessible. It was inaccessible because it was embedded. The deep feed root of a grown ship was not a component that could be reached and examined. It was woven through the ship's entire lower mass, a network so finely distributed that to expose it would be to flay the Vethari to the bone. 3 centuries of Vethari ship-tending tradition had never developed tools for examining it directly. Why would they? The root either worked or it slowed. If it slowed, you sang to it and fed it and waited for it to wake. You did not examine it. Marin listened to this explanation with full attention. Then she asked, what does the deep feed root respond to? Vibration, mineral presence, light spectrum, song historically. Okay. Marin opened the small case she'd carried onto the ship. Orvesa had been curious about it since humans arrived. She'd expected instruments, the sharp, angular, metallic devices she associated with human technology. What she saw instead was a contact microphone the size of a thumbnail, a small device that Marin called a spectrum analyzer. It measured frequencies below and above the biological hearing range, 3 flat pads that Marin said were vibration transducers, and a battered notebook, physical paper, half filled with handwriting. That was it. Orvesa stared at the open case. This is what you brought, she said. I didn't know what I'd need, Marin said. I never do. So I bring the things that help me listen. She held up the contact microphone. This will let me hear what the root is doing without touching it. The transducers can send back. It's a conversation. A conversation, Orvesa said. Between your ship and my tools. Yes. Orvesa sat with the situation for a moment. Our tools are our ship. We do not have separate tools. I know. Marin looked at her with an expression Orvesa could not quite read. Not superiority, not pity, but something more like careful respect. That's not wrong. It's just a different relationship with the problem. You're inside it. I'm outside it. Outside has some advantages when something is sick. And when something is not sick, then being outside is a terrible disadvantage, Marin said simply. I can never know this ship the way you know this ship. But right now, that's okay. Right now you just need someone who can see the shape of the problem from the door. What Marin found took 3 days. She spent most of those 3 days lying flat on the lower root floors of the Vethari with her ear against contact microphones, with the spectrum analyzer running its patient surveys, with her notebook filling with sketches that were not diagrams so much as maps of behavior. The way the root pulsed, when it slowed, what preceded each slowing, and what followed. She did not sleep much. This was not a dramatic sacrifice. She simply found, as she always found in the deep phase of a diagnosis, that rest felt irrelevant. The problem had a texture, and she was learning it. On the second day, Orvesa joined her on the lower root floor. lying side by side with the human in the dim, warm amber of the ship's belly, and said nothing for 4 hours. At the end of those 4 hours, Marin said, "Tell me about the last treaty."
Orvesa did not ask why.
She was learning that Marin's questions came from a place, even when the connection wasn't immediately visible. Orvesa referred to the Vethari boundary agreement. 7 years ago, the Vethari spent 3 months in Vethari space. The Vethari carried the full delegation. What's Vethari space like environmentally?
Cold.
Their star is small and old. Their mineral density is… Orvesa stopped. She did not move, but her skin turned the color of snow. Lower, she said. It has a significantly lower mineral density than the space found in Vethari. For 3 months. For 3 months. And the deep feed route, Marin said carefully, takes its calibration from ambient mineral density? The silence was very long. She recalibrated, Orvesa whispered. She was trying to adapt. She lowered her base frequency to match the mineral environment because she was trying to take care of us. And then when we came home, no one told her to. She never recalibrated back, Marin said. She'd been running on Vethari frequency for 7 years. She had been attempting to locate the Vethran space using the incorrect tuning. Orvesa was making that sound again. The one that wasn't a word. She's been lost, Marin said softly, since the moment she got home. Marin expected the next question to be, "Can you fix it?" That was always the next question. The question was raised in Chile, specifically in the context of the deep-sea installation. The question was raised in the context of the biosynthetic water systems in the Mumbai vertical farms. The issue pertains to the collapsed resonance array on the Lunar Transit Hub.
Can you fix it?
Tell me you can fix it. That's why we brought you here. Orvesa did not ask that. Orvesa asked, did she know? Do you think she knew something was wrong? Marin looked at the Vethari woman. She gazed at the skin, which had turned a soft gray from the spent ashes. At the hands pressed flat against the warm. I think, Marin said carefully, that she knew she couldn't find her way home. I think she's been trying to find it for a very long time. And I think that takes a kind of, I don't know your word for it, a kind of endurance, to keep trying anyway. Orvesa pressed her forehead against the floor. It was a gesture Marin didn't have context for. She learned later it was something Vethari only did in private, only with ships they had bonded to, a gesture of acknowledgement older than the continuance itself. I see what you have been carrying. I did not see it until now. I am sorry. Can she be recalibrated? Orvesa asked, her forehead still pressed to the floor. Yes, Marin said. But not by my tools. She let that sit. My tools found the problem, she continued. But recalibration has to come from inside the relationship.
From you.
From your crew. It must be Vethran frequency. Genuine, not machine transmitted. It has to come from bond memory. The actual mineral hum, carried in the bodies of those who have lived in Vethran space their entire lives, must be present. Orvesa lifted her head. I need to know the precise frequency she needs to return to, Marin said. My analyzer can identify it exactly. And then your root singers need to sing it. Not to comfort her. Not as therapy. As information. This is a signal that she can actually navigate home by.
She will not, Orvesa began.
Her memory. Her memory is damaged because she has been spending all her resources trying to compensate for the incorrect bass tone. Give her the right tone, and she can stop compensating. The memory loss may not be permanent. It may be exhaustion. Orvesa stared at the ceiling of the Vethran's belly, at the dark root weave above them. 300 years of slow growth, a living thing that had carried peace agreements across the stars and was now quietly, painfully trying to remember the name of the sun it had been born under. She's been exhausted, Orvesa said, for 7 years. Yes, Marin said. The continuance sent 40 root singers. Marin had expected a ceremony. The arrival was, in fact, quite quiet. 40 Vethari in the gray-green traveling robes of the resonance guilds, who came aboard the Vethran without announcement and spread through the lower route corridors in small groups, pressing their hands to the walls, reacquainting themselves with a ship most of them had sailed on at least once in their lives. The Vethran was old enough to have carried almost everyone. Marin gave Orvesa the frequency. The frequency was not presented as a numerical value, as Orvesa was unable to perceive it as such. Marin had spent an afternoon calibrating the spectrum analyzer's output tone to a range one of the junior root singers could reproduce, and then had the singer sustain it until every member of the choir had found it in their voice. The tone was low and slow, sitting below the comfortable range of song, forcing the singers to reach for it and descend into their oldest registers. When 40 Vethari sang it together in the Vethari's memory chamber, the walls changed. Marin was in the outer passage when it happened, giving the Vethari their privacy. She felt it through the floor, a shift in the ship's bass vibration, from the slightly off rhythm she'd been listening to for 3 days to something she had no words for except right. It felt like a building that had been fractionally unlevel for so long that you'd stopped noticing the tilt suddenly settling. She sat down on the floor of the corridor, back against the breathing wall, and closed her eyes. She didn't know if it was working. She wouldn't know for a while. She opened her notebook and wrote, as she always did after the diagnostic phase concluded and before the outcome was known. The ship forgot her home. She didn't stop flying. She just flew wrong. She stared at that sentence for a long time. Then she wrote, "Most things don't stop when they're lost. They just use more energy than they should." She wasn't sure if she was writing about the Vethari anymore. Ambassador at Expansion Sulith Vaughn was the first to use the word unimaginable. He used it in his report to the Continuance Council, in the section describing Marin Cole's methodology, and he meant it as a compliment, but it caused considerable debate because several council members heard it as a criticism. "The human did not use any tool we recognize as advanced," he wrote. "She used no energy systems, no biological interface. She did not use any grown instruments or thought-solidified calculations. She brought a microphone, an analysis device smaller than a seed core, and a book made of dead tree pulp filled with her marks. And in 3 days, she found what 7 years of root singing had not found. I have attempted to understand how. I cannot. Not because her tools are sophisticated, they are, by our standards, absurdly primitive. I cannot understand it because her method is not about tools at all." She listened to the ship, as if it were a problem of logic rather than life. And because she was outside the bond, because she was incapable of bonding, being human, and being made of dead thing-building instincts, she could see the shape of the problem without the shape of her love for the ship distorting it. We could not find the fault because we were too close to the patient. The human was not close. And, in the distance, she found what we could not. This is not a comfort. It implies that what we call a limitation in human technology, the inability to grow, to bond, to live in relationship with their machines, is simultaneously a diagnostic precision that we do not possess and cannot easily acquire. I am recommending that the continuance establish a formal knowledge exchange. The goal is not to acquire human technology. Instead, the goal should be to gain a deeper understanding of human distance. The word I keep returning to is unimaginable. I mean, I could not have imagined needing it. The Vethari did not recover overnight. It took 4 months of sustained recalibration singing, the crew adapting their daily resonance practice to include the new bass tone, the root singers cycling through in rotating visits, and Orvesa spending 3 hours each evening in the memory chamber with her hands against the pulse spark, giving the ship what it needed to find its way back. The memories did not return in order. The first thing Vethari remembered was not a star system or a docking corridor. It remembered Orvesa at age 14, the day of their bonding, the specific mineral and light signature of a terrified young girl who had pressed her palms to a seed core barely larger than her head and whispered hello with a voice that shook. Orvesa knew because she woke one morning to find the walls of her quarters shifted to the precise amber tone of her childhood bedroom, which she had never described to anyone. She stood in the middle of her quarters for a long time with her skin the color of early dawn. "You remembered me," she thought. "Before anything else, you remembered me." She pressed her hands flat against the nearest wall. The pulse beneath her palms was steady and slow and, for the first time in 7 years, correct. HFY, she thought, in the oldest formulation of Vethari ship-bond language, the one that had no direct translation but meant roughly, "Now let us begin again, from here, with what we know." The wall was warm. The ship breathed. Marin left the Vethari on a standard continuance shuttle 48 hours after the recalibration singing began, before the outcome was confirmed, because that was how she always worked. She was diagnosed. She pointed. Others healed. Orvesa walked her to the docking aperture. "You will not stay to see if it worked," Orvesa said. "You'll tell me,"
Marin said.
"And anyway, I already know it worked. The frequency was right. The singing will do the rest." She looked down the amber curve of the welcome passage one last time. "She's a wonderful ship. She was working so hard." "Yes. You take good care of her." "I have tried," Orvesa said. "I did not try the right thing until now." Marin was quiet for a moment. "You loved her too much to see her clearly. That's not a failure. That's just what love does sometimes." Orvesa's skin shifted through 3 colors. Marin still didn't have words for it. "What is your next work?" Orvesa asked. "There's a geothermal exchange system in Iceland that's been underperforming for 20 months, and no one knows why." Marin picked up her small case. "Nobody thinks it's intriguing enough to warrant attention, which means it's probably fascinating. You prefer the problems no one else is looking at." "I prefer the problems that are trying to tell you something," Marin said. "Most broken things are." The docking aperture opened. The shuttle waited. "Marin Cole," Orvesa said. Marin turned. "What you brought to us, it was not a tool. It was a way of seeing." "That's all any tool is," Marin said. She stepped through. The aperture closed behind her with a sound like a sigh. 6 months later, the Continuance Council received a full recovery report on the Vethari. Navigation lobe, fully functional. Crew recognition, restored. Star memory, intact, with minor gaps in years 2 through 5 of the forgetting period, which the ship's own systems were slowly reconstructing from contextual echo memory. The Vethari had been assigned a new diplomatic mission, the first in 8 years. She would carry a cultural exchange delegation to the Preth border systems. She would be away for 5 months. Orvesa was going with her. The night before departure, Orvesa sat alone in the memory chamber. The walls breathed slowly. The pulse spark was warm. The amber light came from the ship's own bioluminescence, which had deepened in tone and steadiness over the past months. The light of something that was no longer spending itself, just staying upright. Orvesa had written a message to Marin Cole. It was waiting in the interstellar communication queue. It said, "She remembered the Dovari Treaty mission in full this morning. All 3 months. She told me the exact mineral content of the water supply at Dovari Station 7. She is, I think, laughing about it in the way ships laugh, which is a change in wall temperature that only a bonded tender can feel. I thought you would want to know. The Continuance is still debating what category to place your methodology in. They have decided it does not fit any existing category. Someone proposed a new one. Karo, which is an old Vethari word that means roughly the act of understanding a thing by choosing not to possess it. I thought you would appreciate that. We depart tomorrow. Vethari knows exactly where she is going and how to come home. That is, I think, everything." Orvesa closed the message. She pressed her hands against the pulse bark one more time before sleep. The ship remembered her. Every time now, without effort, the way you remember the people you have known so long they have become part of the shape of the world. The walls breathed. The ship dreamed of stars it knew by name. And somewhere back on a small, loud, improbable planet full of people who built dead things that somehow, stubbornly, miraculously worked, a woman lay on the floor of an Icelandic geothermal plant with a contact microphone and a notebook, listening to something that had been trying to speak for 20 months and had simply never been given a quiet enough room.
She was listening now.
That was enough. And